This took place when I was 9 years old. I shared a room with my big sister, but on weekends during the warmer months I would camp out in the backyard with my 8-year-old little brother Kevin, which was a lot of fun. Something that we both always looked forward to. That year, Halloween fell on a Friday, which was an extra treat for us since we could stay up later. We had a blast trick, or treating. I dressed as a witch and Kevin a pirate. We got a boatload of candy and we were sorting it out in the tent. Suddenly Mom appeared in front of the tent, which kind of startled us as we weren't expecting it, and we didn't hear any footsteps. "Whoa, kids, go easy with the candy now, okay? Or you will have a hard time sleeping," she said. "Sure, Mom," we replied. "Hey, since this is a weekend Halloween, I thought I would give you a special treat. How would you like to hear a ghost story?" asked Mom. Kevin and I were like, "Yay," since we love ghost stories. "But are you sure you'll be able to sleep?" she asked. "Oh yeah, Mom, we love spooky stories. Please tell us some." "All right, but I'm just going to tell you one story, because it's pretty scary," she said as she sat down on the ground. You see, our mom was the disciplinarian and very strict, so we weren't very close to her. We were closer to our dad, who was really easygoing. The last time Mom told us a story was when we were 4 and 5 years old. She often told me that I read too many ghost stories, which she didn't like because with my overactive imagination, I would often see things and get scared. So we were surprised when she wanted to tell us a ghost story that night. But it being Halloween and all, we were only too excited to hear a ghost story, especially from Mom. Mom told us a story about the faceless ghost, which is actually a famous folklore where we live and also in some Asian countries. The story really spooked us out, and by the time she finished, we both had goosebumps, and our mouths were wide open. "Mom, that was really scary. Now you gotta sleep here with us," I said half jokingly, because we would be less afraid, but uncomfortable if she were to sleep there with us. "Don't tell me I didn't warn you. I gotta go back inside now or Dad is gonna think I got captured by a ghost." "Sleep tight, kiddos," she said as she walked out of the tent. I thought her reaction was a bit odd, as she very rarely laughed and would never make jokes like that. I closed the tent, and Kevin and I looked at each other as if saying, "What now?" We're too terrified to sleep, but Kevin always looked up to me as an older sibling, so I had to be brave, or at least give the impression that I was. So I said, "It's getting late. Let's go to sleep." "I don't think I can sleep. What if? Faceless ghost comes to visit us," he said. "Oh, Kevin, please don't say that. Try not to think about it, and let's just go to sleep, okay?" I replied with a shaky voice, which I was hoping he didn't notice. I had an image to maintain, you see, but I actually felt like crying because what he said really scared me. I wished Mom hadn't told us the story and wished she would have stayed. We both lay there in the dark with eyes wide open, listening to the crickets chirping outside. "Let's close our eyes and try to sleep," I said, but we couldn't sleep. In fact, my eyes welled up, and I couldn't help sniffling. "Are you crying?" asked Kevin. "No, silly, it's allergies," I replied, wiping my eyes and nose with my hands. A few minutes later, he said, "Lynn, I'm still scared." "Me too," I replied hesitantly. It helped to be honest. "Hey, you want to go inside?" "We can sleep in your room," I said to him. His room was right across the hallway from our parents', which would be quite comforting, and he had a double bed which would be big enough for both of us. "Yeah, let's do that," he said with excitement. So we held hands and ran towards the back door. As soon as we got inside, I locked the door, and we walked gingerly to Kevin's room, as we didn't want to wake up our parents. When we got into his room, again I locked the door and we both climbed into bed. We felt more secure being inside the house and close to our parents, so we soon fell asleep. We were awakened by Mom knocking at the door and hollering at us. "Lynn, Kevin, are you in there? Wake up and open the door." I looked at the clock, and it was 10:30. We had overslept. I jumped out of bed and opened the door. "Why are you in here? I went looking for you in the tent, and I got worried when I saw you weren't there. You must have stayed up really late last night," she scolded. "Well, we couldn't sleep after you told us that scary story, I replied while rubbing my eyes. What? What are you talking about? Who told you a scary story? Said Mom, which shocked Kevin and me. You did, Mom. It was about the faceless ghost, said Kevin. Huh, don't be silly. I would never tell you such a story. You know I don't like you two reading ghost stories. Telling you one would be the most ridiculous thing, she barked. But Mom, you came to the tent last night and told us you wanted to give us a special treat because it was a weekend Halloween, and you offered to tell us a spooky ghost story, I said. Look, I don't know what you kids are trying to pull here, but I'm not amused. Now go wash up and eat your breakfast, she yelled. Kevin and I looked at each other confused. But before we could say anything else, Mom screamed, "Hurry up! Do you want me to spank you?" So we kept quiet and did as we were told. Later we told Dad everything, but he confirmed that Mom was indeed with him in the bedroom all night. She never left. We were really frightened as we wondered who or what it was that came into our tent and told us the ghost story. Kevin and I thought our parents were trying to pull a Halloween prank on us. But on the other hand, they both thought we were the ones doing it to them and told us to cut it out. We were so frustrated, but there was nothing we could do. We didn't dare to sleep in the tent the next night. Since the colder months were around the corner anyway, Dad took down the tent and we never camped out in the backyard anymore since then. Even to this day, Kevin and I still get spooked when we remember that night. Addiction took our mother slowly, rocked her through it, and sung her to sleep sunk deep into the mattress on her bed. When her back teeth fell out, she left them on the side of the bathtub. I was 7, and I kept them in a matchbox. The missing pieces of her kept safe so she wouldn't be lost forever. So maybe one day we could put her back together. Our house fell down around us, and we tried our best to raise ourselves. The ceilings had water damage, and the bottom stairs had dry rot, and in the winters, the radiators would bleed rust. But it was still our house, and Annie made it a home. My sister Annie mothered me, with lopsided band-aids on bruised knees and lukewarm microwave meals. She told me ghost stories and didn't mind when I crawled into her bed later on, too scared to sleep alone. She taught me to dance, barefoot on the living room carpet, music channel, on full volume on the TV, shaking our hips before they were fully grown. She always let me shower first, so the water was hot, never complaining when she had to make do with cold. She brushed my hair every day before school, even when I screamed and hit her when she caught the tangles. Annie was dark-haired like her father, whoever he had been, but I was blonde. Annie was desperate to be blonde too, like Marilyn Monroe. Like Mom. I think she thought it would make them closer, remind Mom less of her dad. I'd give anything for her to have her hands in my hair one more time, even if it hurt. She moved to New York when I turned 18 and never came back. I still dream about her sometimes. Keeping up with our mother was impossible, and we learned from a young age we would always be left behind. It didn't make it any easier. When she was drinking light, she shone, would wake us up at 3 with pancakes, dripping in cherry syrup. Sometimes when the weather was right, and she'd had enough being drunk alone, she would call our school up and tell them we had both come down with summer sickness and we'd drive to the beach instead. I remember being 9 years old in the back seat of the car coming home after one of our ocean days, sucking the salt from my fingers. Annie had just dyed her hair blonde, her best friend Jane helping her bend over our kitchen sink. From behind, I couldn't tell who was mother and who was daughter, radio up and windows down, blowing the sky inside. When she was drinking heavy, she'd be out all night, hair piled up like a beauty queen, eyes glazed over and ringed with glitter and black. Sometimes she'd be gone a day or two. She would never tell us when one day we'd just wake up to an empty house and the fridge packed full, post-it note on the front with a smear of Mom's lipstick in the outline of a kiss, telling us she'd be back soon. Sometimes she'd bring guys home, filling the table with beer cans and ashtrays, smoke up to the ceiling, Mom lost in the haze. We'd sleep with pillows over our heads, trying to drown out the music they would blast until and wake up to strangers at our kitchen table in the morning, asking us where we kept the coffee. When Mom drank too little, she fell apart. She wouldn't buy food, refrigerator, a gaping hole in the wall. She'd chain smoke, leaving cigarette burns on the wallpaper up by the stairs, like the walls were sick and decaying. She barely slept, walking around with blue half-moons under her eyes, knuckles raw. She would scream at the slightest thing. I remember once, when I spilled a glass of juice on the couch. She looked over at me with dead eyes and dragged me off onto the carpet, and then took every single cushion off the couch and into the backyard and set them on fire. Annie went to watch a while from the window, and then sat next to me on the floor, backs pressed against the skeleton of the seats, head resting in the crater of my collarbones. When Mom drank too much was the worst. She'd laugh too loud and too long at anything and everything, until her mouth started to shake and she started crying, at the breakfast table into her cereal. Annie shut down when Mom was like this, went somewhere deep inside herself where nobody could hurt her. She'd stay up until the morning watching old black and white movies on TV, whispering the lines she knew by heart like prayers. When I was 5, I'd cry when I'd find Mom passed out cold on her bed, sure she would never wake up. Annie would wipe my tears, tell me she was only sleeping, just like the princesses in my storybook. We'd sit on Mom's bed together and wait for her to wake up. When we were older, I was the one who would pick Mom up off the bathroom floor again and again and again and again, and then Annie would put her to bed, smoothing her hair off her face and the vomit from her mouth, changing her clothes if she'd pissed herself. Watching them then, there was no doubt that Annie was the mother now. It was October, and I was 13, Annie 16. It was a Wednesday night, and Mom had been gone for 2 days. She'd called us that morning from a payphone, voice slurring down the line, telling us she was having the best time with all her new friends, hoped we were doing fine. When she asked me if I was having a good birthday, I hung up on her. My birthday had been the day before. Annie had given me a pile of presents, strawberry lip glosses, and glittery nail polishes. I didn't ask where she'd got the money for them. I didn't care. We'd taken the bus to the beach with Jane, eaten the birthday cake she had made for me, sand getting into the frosting. It tasted like sweetness and the sea, and I savored every bite and scrape of sugar against my teeth. We watched the sun go down, Annie snapping grainy photos on her shitty Nokia as I blew out my candles, wishing over and over that Mom wouldn't come home, that she'd just stay gone this time. But that Wednesday night, me and Annie weren't speaking. Anger hung heavy between us, seeping through the floorboards. It began when she tripped at the bottom of the stairs. We'd both laughed, Annie throwing her head back, gap between her front teeth, catching the light. When I'd bent to pick her up, I'd caught her breath, warm against the freckles on my cheeks. I let go of her arms and she fell again, hitting the floor and grinning, shaking her hair from her face. Her breath was heavy with whiskey. I couldn't start picking her up too, couldn't watch her fall again and again. Just like Mom, I knew she'd never get back up. I'd stared down at her, blonde hair fallen into her eyes, and all I could see was our mother. And then I was running, feet slamming the hallway like heartbeats turned loose. I'd run for the kitchen and tipped every bottle we had down the sink, shoving Annie back as she fought to stop me, catching liquor on her fingers as it fell. She grabbed my shoulders and made me drop the very last bottle. It smashed between us on the floor, glass shards shining like we dragged the stars out of the sky and broken them. Pieces we could never put back. Outside, through the open windows, the sky turned pale gold. Clouds a mess of pink and cream smeared across the horizon. I cried then, watching Annie on her knees, picking up the pieces. That was Annie, always trying to fix things even when it was too late. The smell of food dragged me from my room, stomach-turning traitor inside my ribcage. Annie was cooking pasta, real food not made in a microwave. She'd set the table, Tammy Wynette singing softly from the CD player, Annie gently swaying her hips as she stirred the tomato sauce, rich and warm. As we ate in silence, with every bite I forgave her. Mom never cooked dinner, or remembered my favorite was spaghetti ever since I was a kid or stayed sober long enough to sit up at a table, Annie wasn't Mom. We were washing the dishes when we first heard it. A moth was crawling down the inside of the pane, and I cracked the window to let it out into the dark. From the backyard came a faint sound. I tilted my head to listen as it was coming from far off, crying. I figured it was Micah, the 2-year-old next door, having a tantrum loud enough for us to catch, or maybe even Lucky Strike the cat that junkies down the street, begging for food like he sometimes did. I always wanted to feed him when he came around, winding over my ankles, but Annie always stopped me, saying once you started giving, they never stopped taking. Looking back, I don't think she was talking about the cat. Annie flipped the Christmas lights strung up around the porch, and we sat on the plastic beach chairs watching the skies. When we were little, we'd sit outside and Annie would tell me the names of all the constellations and the stories of how they came to be hung up in the night sky. I had to grow up before I realized she made them all up as she went along. It was a game we still like to play now, making up ridiculous stories for the shapes we could pick out. Yes. That one, there is the core's light. It got there when God dropped it out of his convertible window and never picked it up, she said, nodding sagely and hiding her smile. Of course, I said, waving my hands and pointing up past the power lines. Right next to the ashtray left there by angels on a smoke break. Yeah, they say if you wish on it, all your dream will come true, said Annie, grinning. She stopped laughing, voice quieter, face tilted up to all those dead stars. Let's wish, Emmy. Let's wish so we did. The sound of crying interrupted us. It was closer this time and definitely human. We turned to each other, confused. Annie shrugged and I squinted out into the black. It sounded like a baby, lost and tired and alone. It must be Micah, I said, slowly getting to my feet. Maybe he walked around the back. Shit. Do you want to call Connie and tell her we'll bring him over? Annie didn't reply, and I sighed, rolling my eyes. Guess I'll do everything then. I stepped off the porch, grass soft against my heels. The air smelled like it might rain, fresh and clean and growing. A promise unfulfilled. Annie's voice was strained. I turned to her, smiling. It died on my face when I saw the look on her own.
Get inside now. She was staring out into the dark past me, opening the door with one hand behind her, fingers fumbling on the catch.
I froze, barefoot in the dirt. I'd found what she was looking at. In the bushes by the back fence was a person, crouched with their knees tucked up neat under the chin, arms wrapped around legs. Their mouth hung wide, softly opening and closing as he cried, like a child lost in the dark. Not like a child, but as someone pretending. Mimicking the sound, open and closed out in the blackness. Suddenly they straightened, snapping upright face still hidden by the black. They were tall and thin, too thin to be a normal person. Panic made me move, animal instincts left over from the days we lived up in the trees carrying me forward. I was faster than Annie, dragging her inside and slamming the door behind us, hearing it bounce on its hinges as I locked it. We watched as the person slowly walked towards the house. Steps, deliberate and long. Annie reached for my hand, holding me tight and turned me to face her, holding my shoulders. Don't turn around, Emmy. Don't turn around. Instinctively, I started to look over my shoulder out into the darkness. Annie grabbed my face hard and shook her head. I knew then she was serious. Her voice cracked, and she cleared her throat, gripping my hand tight enough to hurt, nails digging in, grounding herself. I looked down at our fingers interlocked, both of us grown from the same bones. I'm gonna call the cops and everything is gonna be... Her voice faltered, stuttering. Tears spilled over her lashes, dripping like the promise of rain. Annie never cried. Your phone's on the porch, she whispered, and bile crawled its way up my throat. Her phone was upstairs, charging. A soft tap, 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 tapping filled the silence. Annie turned to the window, eye whites showing her eyes were so wide. It was the sound of someone's forehead against the glass, slowly, over and over. They started to speed up faster and harder, skin meeting glass until they was slamming into the window hard enough to shake the panes. The tapping stopped, and I was about to ask Annie if I could look now when she screamed, followed by the sound of cracking glass and the loudest slam yet. Whoever was in our yard had just smashed their face hard enough into the window to break it. We ran upstairs 2 at a time, skipping the ones caved in with dry rot on instinct. I turned behind me once and Annie yanked my face back before I could see. The sound of broken glass echoed behind us as we made it to the bathroom, locking the door. A thin, wailing cry like a baby calling for its mother filled the hallway, trapped between the walls and locked doors. Annie threw her back against the door, feet jammed up against the bathtub, clutching the knife she had grabbed from the kitchen. I did the same, shoulder to shoulder. Slow footsteps started on the stairs, deliberate and casual. The crying had become mocking, almost laughter, shrill bursts of sound, and then giggles, high-pitched and abruptly stopping before starting again. The first door on the upstairs floor was my bedroom, and we heard the distinct sound of it slamming open. They were looking for us. "What the fuck is going on?" I asked Annie, not even bothering to brush away the tears that I couldn't stop falling. I watched my sister pick herself up off the floor and brace her hands on the door as we heard the sound of a second door slamming open. Mom's room. The next room on the hallway was the bathroom. Annie pulled me to my feet and handed me the knife. I shook my head and pushed it back to her, terrified of what would happen if I had to use it. Annie shoved me and pressed the knife into my hands, thumb pressing hard enough on the blade to bleed. I watched my sister's blood drip down her wrist, a winding red road still pushing into my hands despite the pain. I took the knife. Something slammed against the wall that Mom's room shared with the bathroom. A high-pitched wail followed. I held my breath, could feel my heartbeat in the base of my throat, a wild and frantic thing. "I'm gonna get the phone from my room." I shook my head violently, about to argue. Annie clamped a hand over my mouth. I could taste the blood on her hand, salty and sweet, like birthday cake by the ocean. "Yes, I'm gonna get the phone and I'm gonna call the cops and we're gonna be okay." I shook my head again. "It's the only way. When I go, I need you to lock the door and you don't open it for anything or anyone. Not for me, not for me, not for me, not for anyone. Promise me." I shook my head and Annie pressed her hand into my mouth, crushing my teeth against my lips so it made my eyes water. "Yes, promise me, Something smashed in the room next door." Annie brushed the hair off my face, gently tucking it behind my ear. "Promise," she mouthed and unlocked the door as slowly as possible, bolt scraping gently. I watched the curve of her shoulder disappear into the black hall outside like the moon in eclipse. And then she was gone. I couldn't move or breathe for a second, and then I slammed the bolt shut, just as something bounced off the outside of the door. A high-pitched scream followed, handle rattling up and down hard enough to pop one of the screws. I watched it roll towards me on the tiles. And then silence. I sat with my back to the door, holding the knife and wishing I was holding Annie's hand instead. Still silence. Nothing but me and my lungs slowly filling the room with my breath. Came a voice through the door. I started, hands gripping the knife.
"Honey, what's going on?"
"Mom," my voice cracked. "Mama, is that you?" I wrapped my arms around myself, shaking, trying to keep myself still. "Sweetie, it's okay, just open the door. It's okay, just let me in. The handle rattled again, gentler. Just let me in, it's all okay." She banged on the door and I took my handle of the bolt. "Honey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I missed your birthday. I'm sorry I'm such a terrible mother." "Please," her voice broke and she started to cry. "Just let me in, baby. I'm so sorry." I screwed my eyes shut. She sounded so sad and so lost. I just wanted her to hold me like when I was a kid and I'd come in off the swings with a scraped knee. Maybe this time she meant it. Maybe it would all be okay. My hand found its way to the bolt again. My sister's voice came through the door, warm and gentle. "Yeah, Emily, let us in. It's all okay." My hand froze on the bolt, and I tightened my grip on the knife. Annie never called me by my full name. A hand banged on the door, handle rattling. "Emily, let us in." Annie's voice became low and guttural, followed by the same shrill giggles from before. Mom spoke now, pleading and crying, voice getting louder and louder. "Let us in, let us in, let us in, let us in," over and over again, punctuated by her fists on the door. I thought about demons and monsters, all the bedtime stories we pray, "Don't crawl out from under the bed." "That's not my sister, and you're not my mother." I screamed through the door, hands over my head. I climbed into the bathtub and curled in a ball, cradling myself, knife clutched to my chest. I didn't know what it was outside that door, but I knew it wasn't Annie. It wasn't the voice that yelled at when I changed TV channel, the one that sang me happy birthday, the one that sang me happy birthday, the one that told me I was smart even when I got bad grades, the one that read me stories about princesses that never wake up. It wasn't human. Bangs and yells came from downstairs, followed by the footsteps of people running. A low, guttural howl ripped through the house, filling the room until I felt like I was drowning in the sound, and then the door was kicked in. I screamed, covering my eyes, waiting to die. Arms found me and lifted me from the tub, carrying me from the room. I looked at the outside of the door as I was carried downstairs. It was covered in long, scraping claw marks, dragged down to the floor. Pillows ripped apart covered the hallway and soft down, like it had snowed inside. I watched them drift slowly as men in uniforms checked each of the rooms that looked like they had been torn apart by something feral. Outside in our driveway were police cars and an ambulance. In the middle of it all was Annie, bathed in blue and red light as it washed over her, lit up in the dark like a neon angel, face aglow. I threw myself from the cop's shoulder and ran to her, holding us both together, broken pieces and all, standing under all those constellations we made up. Gentle screaming came from the ambulance, which rocked occasionally. Annie gently turned my head away, smiling so sadly it made my chest ache as I understood. Turns out there was no demon, no wild animal or bad man trying to break in. Just Mom, out of her mind on booze and drugs and everything in between, coming to the end of a week-long binge. Something had finally broken inside her head, and this time we couldn't put her back together no matter how hard we tried. Sometimes you fall one last time and you never get back up. Annie had seen her in the garden, blood dribbling from her mouth, track marks bulging on her forearms like unmapped roads, rail thin and desperate for one more hit, one more fix. She'd searched the kitchen for all the drink I'd thrown away, and when she hadn't found it, had come to hunt for the stash she hid in the bathroom. She hadn't wanted me, just the drugs on the other side of the door, so high she could mimic Annie's voice almost perfectly. Turns out the real monsters are the ones that eat you alive slowly, the kind that come in a bottle or a needle or at the end of a long list of reasons why you can't get out of bed in the morning. Sometimes the monsters are the ones that raise you or love you the most, but it's up to you if you let them in. I'd been hunting for 5 years. Before that, I was in the Army for 10. And before that, I was a scout on the biathlon team and into recreational hiking and camping. Suffice it to say, I've spent a lot of years off the beaten track. I'm in the low-risk category to get into trouble in the woods. I'm armed, have bear spray, have with me a radio and mobile phone, depending on proximity to cell towers, and possibly a GPS, and I always have a compass and maps. I know the woods and how to survive, and I don't spook easily. I typically hunt solo in massive tracts of crown land in northern Ontario. I've seen or heard wolves, coyotes, and mountain lions. I even saw a wolverine once. Black bears do not concern me. Moose are dangerous, but I keep my distance or shoot them as I'm typically hunting them. Unless I'm badly hurt, I really have nothing to fear from animals in the woods. Humans are the apex predator after all, and it's good to be king. That being said, I am wary but not afraid of other men I run into in the woods, and most of the time. They're friendly and go on their way. Some are aggressive and are drunk, but offering them a cigarette and a kind word tends to calm those guys down. I'll share a couple of unexplained occurrences, however, that still chill me to this day. The first one happened a few years ago while I was solo hunting deer in the fall. I was camped for the night in a vast, frozen, swampy area. The only access was a decades-old logging track off the main road, and I was several kilometers from that track. There were no other hiking trails or other access, so I was sure I was quite alone. As a matter of fact, I hadn't seen or heard anyone else for 2 days. I had a good dinner and went to sleep as it started to lightly snow. I woke up with a start at 4:32. I know the exact time because I looked at my watch. I could clearly hear sleigh bells, the kind Santa's reindeer wear. There were no other sounds except the wind and snow, no pre-dawn birds, footfalls, or snapping twigs. Just eerie bells intermittently jingling. At first, I thought I was still dreaming, but I forced myself to check all my gear to prove to myself that I was awake. Then I sat there, shivering in my tent, praying that whatever was making that sound would go away. Going outside there to look wouldn't have helped. It was pitch black anyway. My mind was running through all the logical possibilities. I'm dreaming it's a dog or a cat wearing a bell on its collar. It's an escaped reindeer. It's actually Santa. It's actually Santa. It's hikers wearing bear bells. My mind started to get away from me. I finally couldn't take it any longer and shouted out, "Whoever's ringing those damn bells can go away now." The bells abruptly stopped. I sat there listening for another couple of hours, my mind racing, with chills arcing down my spine. Thankfully, they never came back. When dawn broke, I scouted the area with my self-loading rifle, looking for a sign of who or what had passed in the dark. There was a fresh layer of snow on everything, so finding tracks would be easy. Not one track, nothing, for hundreds of paces in every direction. I had been thorough. On discovering that, I broke camp and got the fuck out of there. Hunting was over for the season in that spot. Sure, I tried to laugh it off, scared out of the woods by Santa. You're such a little bitch, but I was truly spooked. A few years later, I was out for grouse, beating the bushes for those elusive gray birds. The area I was in was remote but was cut in two by some high-voltage power lines and towers. I was walking the edge of one of those cuts, enjoying the sunny day and whistling. I really enjoy upland bird hunting. It's a relaxing way to spend the day and very casual, as far as hunting goes. I wasn't surprised to hear it V-engines after some time, and I walked over to the one that stopped near me. "See any birds?" He practically yelled at me, still deafened by his engine. I offered my hand and he shook it. "Hanson," he introduced, looking me up and down. "That's my surname." I chuckled and told him mine. He was an old dude. I'm middle-aged and getting on there, but he was old. We had a smoke and shot the breeze. His great-grandfather had established the first hunting camp in the area back in 1839, and they still ran it every fall. He knew these woods well. We compared shotguns, talked about the beautiful weather and the usual bullshittery. When I found out they had no younger guys in their party, I was actually hoping for an invite to his camp for deer season and was angling the conversation that way. Get some tips and stories, new blood carrying on the tradition and all. "How long you been coming here?" He'd cut me off, suddenly and sternly. "A couple of years, most for birds," I said. "Then you've heard her." "Her? What the fuck's he talking about?" "The witch." I couldn't help but smile at that, although his face was deadpan and serious. Right away, I knew he was trying to spook me off his hunting spot with ghost stories, and just before deer season to boot. Fuck this old codger, what a dick. This is public property, after all. "So you're telling me a witch has haunted these woods since the 19th century? I was humoring him. "Yeah, something like that." He spit and put his smoke out with his boot. He used to live in that abandoned farmhouse off the access road. I had seen the place before, a creepy pioneer log cabin, disused for generations. When my young son had been with me one day, he had refused to go near the place. He had complained that it made him feel all wrong. You know she's nearby when you hear sleigh bells. My blood froze. Well, nice meeting you, Hanson. Thanks for the chat. I stammered and abruptly turned and walked back to the cut, and I could feel him staring at me the whole way. He eventually started his engine and rode away. What an asshole! How did he know that? Was this some sort of backwoods folklore about witches and sleigh bells? I walked straight to my truck and drove out of there fast. When I got home, I Googled it for hours, and nothing came up. I eventually wrote it off as coincidence and tried to push it out of my mind. Sometime later, I was packing for my deer hunt. I had buddies coming in from distant cities. It was going to be glorious, and I wouldn't have to go out alone. But then they all canceled one by one. Wife's in the hospital, was one story. More like, she's got your balls. Another one had to work, the always busy and hectic doctor. That story was more believable. Another one was suddenly working nights. No matter, I was going anyway, and would send them pictures of my magnificent deer and regale them with stories for years, whilst reminding them of their lame cancellations. I went back to the power lines area, as I had seen and followed many game trails during my bird hunting there. Besides, I sure as shit was not going back to the frozen swamp of witch bells, as I now called it. I knew Hanson and his mates would be around, but I knew where their camp was, and I was heading to the southwest near Little Birch Lake, deep in the woods. I had butterflies in my stomach, pretty common for me at the beginning of a season, all giddy with excitement. But they were more intense somehow. I tried not to think of Hanson's story. Then again, if Hanson had obviously survived years of hunting in the same woods, so would I. Fuck it. I went. Furthermore, the weather was nice, intermittent sun, and hovering around freezing. Overall, a nice day to go out in the woods. I wore a smile when I headed out. If you've never been big game hunting in close country in the bush as it's known, it's rather slow going. You're wearing light boots and sneaking around, trying to make as little noise as possible. My buddies and I call it Last of the Mohicans style. Every step is measured and placed carefully, toe to heel, to reduce noise. Your head's up, scanning around, ears straining for any hint of game sounds. You stop just to listen, frequently. The English call it still hunting or stalking. I much prefer it to sitting in a stand, freezing your ass off all day. I proceeded southwest from the cut at my snail's pace. It probably took me all day to cover the 5 or 6 kilometers to the lake. But it was exhilarating. Gliding silently through the bush like an expert tracker, taking in all the sights, sounds, and smells. The weather had soured over the course of the afternoon, clouding over and getting breezy. It was getting darker and colder. The late fall forest had come alive, swaying and creaking in the breeze. The change had been so gradual, I hadn't noticed it. The witch. It came unbidden into my mind. Fuck you, Hanson, I muttered out loud. You're not going to spook me. I realized at that point that I hadn't had a smoke all day. I lit one and sat down, trying to calm my nerves. The smoke was helping. When I was putting it out, I saw something. A hint of black, an unusual color in the woods. Bear. I shouldered my rifle and clicked the safety off, peering through the illuminated reflex sight. Just me, Bear. Go away now. You don't want to tangle with me. I started talking out loud in the manner I had learned to scare the elusive beasts away. But I wasn't taking any chances. I had a full magazine of 308 Accubons at my command, should it come to that. And I was an expert shot, having been shooting since I was a kid. I was standing now, in a firing stance, and stepping towards the black smear while talking. It didn't move, and as it came into full view, I lowered my rifle. Animal kill. I let out a sigh of relief and walked over to it, chuckling out loud at my nervousness. It was the scene of a bird's demise, a turkey by the looks of it, and fresh. There had been a struggle, and there were feathers everywhere. A fox or a coyote had had a good meal, that was for certain. One of its claws was left, From the drumstick up, it had been gnawed off. I saw the other leg propped up against a tree nearby, and under it was the tail fan. I went to check it out. It looked unnatural. The fan had been cleanly severed from the bird, and the leg had been cut off at the joint with a knife. The evil-looking claw had clearly been propped up against the tree by someone. I tossed the claw from between my fingertips, anxious to be rid of it. My mind began racing again. I was in the middle of nowhere with no trails. There are no witches, I mumbled as I stood up. I took a deep breath and pressed on, uncertainly. It was nearly dusk now, and the brackish small lake had come into view. The wind was gusting now, carrying with it the scent of putrid, semi-frozen water. I was still feeling rattled, but I resolved to find a spot, set up camp, build a big-ass fire, and drink the flask of brandy I had in my breast pocket. Eat some food and fall asleep. That would make everything better. I was nearing the edge of a clearing by the lake, feeling better about my situation, when I heard a loud splash, sounding like something big had jumped into the water, closely followed by another one. Then nothing but the wind, as ripples spread across the water. I moved closer to see where they or it had gone in. Then I heard them again. Sleigh bells. I could feel the tendrils of panic tightening around my chest and temples, like the first time I had been in combat. My vision narrowed. Fuck you, Hanson. I've had enough of your shit. You're not gonna scare me out of here. Hello. Come out here right fucking now. I shouted into the gloom. Yet I could see nothing for the trees. More bells. I'm not ashamed to admit that I fled. I shouted a curse and started back the way I came in. I grabbed at my compass hanging from a lanyard at my shoulder. My hands were shaking as I tried to make out the luminous dial. The needle spun around at random, totally useless. I held my wrist with my other hand to try and steady it. The bells continued. While breaking into a jog, I fumbled for my GPS and hit the backtrack button. It lit up trail to my truck. I could swear the bells were following me. I'm warning you, quit following me. I had my rifle up now, aimed back towards the lake. The bells didn't stop. I couldn't see anything by this point. It was pitch black. I realized the futility of threatening with a rifle in the dark, turned around, and continued stomping through the woods, far too quickly, occasionally tripping and cursing. The bells started to subside, then stop. Please make it to the truck, I was chanting as I crashed through the tangle of woods. I finally regained enough composure to put a headlamp on, so I wouldn't fall down as much. It took me seemingly forever to fight myself through the undergrowth, skinning my shins and knees and hands. I was chanting the whole way. When I finally got to the truck, I was certain nothing had followed me as I fumbled with the keys. More bells. I don't remember the drive home. Weeks passed. I calmed down. I was thankful that I wasn't harmed or went missing. Somewhat selfishly, but also for my family's sake, I had resolved to never go hunting alone again. I was watching TV with my wife one night. She was flipping channels. Would be staying at home, making a big picnic in bed. Click. Missing hunters have been found after the search. Click. Wait, I yelled at her. Go back, go back. What's your problem? Jesus. Click. A provincial police officer's talking head appeared on the screen. Edward Hanson, 86, of Lanark County, and his brother Robert, 83, also from Lanark, have been found. Deceased weeks after the search for them had been called off. The coroner has ruled this to be an accidental drowning. No. I was standing now, hands on my head. What's wrong, babe? Babe? After being found on the shore of remote Little Birch Lake. No foul play is suspected, and we are not treating this as an active homicide investigation at this time. Anyone with information about their disappearance is urged to come forward.